The second problem we're going to do for Chapter 5 is problem 5-4b, Purchases, Cash Payments Journal, and the Accounts Payable Subsidiary Ledger. So now instead of looking at our customer side of things, we're going to look at our creditor side of things. The West Texas Exploration Company was established on October 15th to provide oil drilling services. West Texas uses field equipment, rigs and pipes, and field supplies, drill bits and lubricants in its operations. Transactions related to purchases and cash payments during the remainder of October are as follows. And there it lists our transactions. Our instructions. Journalize the transactions for October. Use a purchases journal and a cash payments journal similar to those illustrated in this chapter, and a 2-column general ledger. Set debit columns for field supplies, office supplies, and other accounts in the purchases journal. Refer to the following partial chart of accounts. Now, in our working papers, we have a purchases journal, which is in the landscape form. We have a cash payments journal, and we have a general journal. We're going to start with our general ledger, which we have to set up. Our first account listed in our textbook is cash. So we're going to write in cash, and the account number is 11. They didn't give us any balances for these, so we're just writing in the account names and the account numbers. The second one is field supplies. Account number 14. And I'm getting these out of your textbook. They have a list of the chart of accounts. The third one is office supplies. Account number 15. Prepaid rent. Account number 16. Field equipment. Account number 17. On the next page, office equipment. Account number 18. Land. Account 19. Accounts payable. $21. Salary expense. $61. And the last one is rent expense. $71. Also listed in our textbook, we have subsidiary accounts that go into the accounts payable ledger, and there's 3 subsidiary accounts. So in your working papers, find the ledger that says Accounts Payable Subsidiary Ledger at the top. The first one is called A1 Office Supply Company. There's no account number, so we're just going to list the name. The second one is Midland Supply Company. And the last one is Petro Services, Inc. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, now that we have all of our accounts set up, go ahead and set your ledgers to the side. And we're going to be working with our cash payments and general journals and with our purchases journal. We're going to start there. Looking on page 248, our first journal entry says that they issued check number 1 in payment of rent for the remainder of October, $7,000. Issued check number 1 in payment of rent for the remainder of October, $7,000. Since we're writing out a check, we're not going to put it in our purchases journal, but we're going to put it in our cash payments journal because we're paying cash. So the first thing we're going to do is fill in our date, which is October 16th, 2014. Check number 1. We're paying our rent. So if we look at our chart of accounts, we're paying rent, and the only account that has anything to do with rent is rent expense. So that's the account we're going to use. Now, our columns in this journal are a little bit different. We have an other accounts, an accounts payable, and a cash. We're obviously going to credit cash because that's the only credit column there is. Also, it's the cash payments journal, so we're crediting cash because we're paying cash. Rent expense is not an account payable, so it's going to go in the other accounts debit column, $7,000. Okay, the next journal entry on the 16th, we purchased field equipment on account from Petro Services, Inc. Purchased field equipment on account from Petro Services, Inc. Since we're purchasing something, we're going to go to our purchases journal, fill in our date, October 16th. Our account credited is Petro Services, Inc. Now, this journal is set up completely different. We have 3 columns: accounts payable credit, field supplies debit, and office supplies debit. And then we also have this entire section for other accounts debit. Okay. We only have 1 credit column, and that is accounts payable, because that's the only time you're going to put anything in the purchases journal is if you're purchasing something on account. So we're going to credit accounts payable for $32,600. Now, our textbook tells us that we purchased field equipment. Field equipment is different from field supplies. They are 2 different accounts, so it's not going to go there. Field equipment is not office supplies, so it has to go over here. So we're going to list field equipment and the amount $32,600. Okay, back in our textbook, on the 17th, purchased field supplies on account from Midland Supply Company. Purchased field supplies on account from Midland Supply Company. We're purchasing, so we're going to stay in our purchases journal. We're going to start with our date, which is the 17th. Our account is Midland Supply Company, Midland Supply Company. So we're going to have an accounts payable credit, $9,780. Now our book tells us that we purchased field supplies. Field supplies is one of our headings, so we're going to list $9,780 as a debit to field supplies. Back to our textbook on the 18th, issued check number 2 in payment of field supplies, $4,570, and office supplies, $650. Issued check number 2. Since we're writing a check, we're going to go to our cash payments journal. Our date is the 18th, and we issued check number 2. Field supplies, is the first thing that we've purchased or that we are paying for. Field supplies is not an accounts payable account, so therefore we're going to use our other account, and that was $4,570. We also have office supplies, so we're going to list office supplies. For $650. We're going to add these two numbers together, and that's going to give us our cash credit of $5,220. Okay. The next one on the 20th. Purchased office supplies on account from A1 Office Supply Company. Purchased office supplies on account from A1 Supply Company. Since we're purchasing something on account, we're going to go to our purchases journal, starting with our date of the 20th. A1 Office Supply Company. I think I need to write smaller. We're going to have an accounts payable credit of $1,320. We're purchasing office supplies, so we'll have an office supply debit of $1,320. Okay, back in our textbook, it tells us to post the journals to the accounts payable subsidiary ledger. Post the journals to the accounts payable subsidiary ledger. So you're going to grab the one page that says accounts payable subsidiary ledger at the top of it. Looks like this. We're going to start with our purchases journal. I'm going to kind of use the paper to help us out here. The first one we're going to look at is Petro Services, Inc. Petro Services, Inc. had an accounts payable credit of $32,600. So we're going to find Petro Services, Inc. We're going to fill in our date first, which was October 16th. Our post reference is P for the purchases journal 1, because that's the page number. And we had a credit of $32,600. Because we are in the accounts payable ledger, all of our balances are automatically credit balances. So we're just going to pull this $32,600 over into the balance column. Back in our journal, again, we have no account numbers, so we're just going to check mark to show that we've done it. The next one is Midland Supply Company, which has an accounts payable credit of $9,780. So Midland Supply Company, October 17th, 2014. P1 for purchases 1. Had a credit of $9,780. So therefore the balance is $9,780. Okay, back in your journal, we're going to put in a check mark. The next one, A1 Office Supply Company, had a credit of $1,320. So again, we fill in our date, October 17th. P1 for purchases 1. A credit of $1,320 and a credit balance of $1,320. And put a check mark in your journal. So we have posted all of the journal entries that are in our purchases journal. So we're going to set that one aside, not too far, but we're going to set it aside. Looking at our cash payments journal, again, we're only posting right now to our accounts payable subsidiary ledger. If we look at our cash payments journal, we have rent expense, field supplies, and office supplies, and none of those are accounts payable accounts. So we're not going to post anything out of our cash payments journal. Go ahead and set your accounts payable ledger to the side. And we're going to go back into our textbook to see what our next transaction is. The bottom of page 248, there is one last transaction there. Issued check number 3 to Petro Services, Inc. in payment of the October 16th invoice. Issued check number 3 to Petro Services, Inc. in payment of the October 16th invoice. So we're going to go to our cash payments journal. It is the 24th, check number 3. We are writing this check to Petro Services, Inc. And it says, in payment of the October 16th invoice. So we can look at our purchases journal and see on October 16th, it was $32,600. So that's the number we're going to use. We're going to credit cash for $32,600 because that's how much we're paying. And we're going to debit accounts payable because we no longer owe that amount. We have to take it out of the accounts payable account. The next one in our textbook, issued check number 4 to Midland Supply Company in payment of the October 17th invoice. Check number 4, Midland Supply, October 17th invoice. So staying in our cash payments journal, it is the 26th, check number 4. Midland Supply Company. Looking at our purchases journal, on the 17th, Midland Supply had a credit of $9,780. So we're going to credit cash for $9,780 and debit accounts payable for $9,780 because that is the amount that we no longer owe. That's the amount we're paying. So we need to remove it from our accounts payable account. On the 28th, we issued check number 5 to purchase land for $240,000. 28th, issued check number 5 to purchase land. So we're still in our cash payments journal. Our date is the 28th, and it is check number 5. We're purchasing land, which is not an accounts payable account. Since we're purchasing land, which is not accounts payable, we're going to do an other accounts debit for $240,000 and a cash credit for $240,000. The next one, purchased office supplies on account from A1 Office Supply Company. 28th, purchased office supplies on account from A1 Supply Company. So we're going to grab our purchases journal. The date is the 28th. A1 Office Supply Company. Whoops. A little ahead of myself there. An accounts payable credit for $3,670. And we purchased office supplies. So it's going to be an office supplies debit for $3,670. Okay, next thing in our book tells us to post the journals to the accounts payable subsidiary ledger. So go ahead and grab your accounts payable ledger. And we're going to start with our purchases journal. And the first thing in our purchases journal that needs to be posted is the one that we just journalized, and that is the 28th to A1 Office Supplies. So come down here to our ledger. 28th, P1, because we're still in our purchases journal. It was a credit for $3,670. Since we're in our accounts payable ledger, this is automatically a credit balance. So we're going to add these two numbers together. and we get $4,990. Back in your journal, put a check mark to show that you've done that one. There aren't any more entries in our purchases journal, so we'll set that one aside. We already looked at the first three last time. Now we're going to go to the next one, which is Petro Services, Inc. That is an accounts payable account. We have an accounts payable debit for $32,600. So we're going to come down to our ledger, to Petro Services, Inc. The date is the 24th. Our post reference is going to be CP1. CP stands for cash payments. We have a debit of $32,600. If we look at our balance, we had a credit balance of $32,600, and now we have a debit of the same. So we're going to draw a line through them to show that there is no more balance. Back in your journal, we're going to check mark that one to show that we've completed it. Okay, the next one in our journal is the 26th. We had an accounts payable debit for $9,780 to Midland Supply Company. So we'll come down to your ledger. The date was the 26th. CP1 for cash payments 1. We had a debit of $9,780. Excuse me. Since we had a credit balance of $9,780 and we're debiting it for $9,780, subtract them and we get 0. So we're going to put a line there. There's no account number, so in your journal, we're going to check mark that one to show that we've done it. The last one in this journal lists land, and that is not an accounts payable account. So we're finished with our accounts payable ledger for right now. So go ahead and set that aside. And we're going to go back to our textbook. On the 30th, we purchased the following from Petro Services, Inc. on account: field supplies and office equipment. On the 30th, purchased the following from Petro Services, Inc. on account: field supplies and office equipment. So we're going to come to our purchases journal. It is the 30th. Our account title is Petro Services, Inc. We purchased field supplies, so we have a column for field supplies, so we're going to debit that for $25,300. And we also purchased office equipment. We do not have a column for office equipment, so we're going to come over here to where it says Other Debit and list office equipment. Which is a debit for $5,500. We're going to add these two numbers together, and that's going to become our accounts payable credit. When you add them together, you get $30,800. Okay, back to our textbook. On the 30th, issued check number 6 to A1 Office Supply Company in payment of the October 20th invoice. Issued check number 6 to A1 Office Supply Company. So we're going to our cash payments journal. Our date is the 30th. Check number 6. A1 Office Supply Company. Our book says, in payment of the October 20th invoice. So we're going to scoot over to our purchases journal. On the 20th, we had an invoice to A1 for $1,320. So we're going to debit accounts payable for $1,320 and credit cash for $1,320. We're paying them that amount, and we're removing it from our accounts payable because we no longer owe that amount. The next one in our textbook, purchased field supplies on account from Midland Supply Company. purchased field supplies on account from Midland Supply Company. So in our purchases journal, 30th, Midland Supply Company. We purchased field supplies, and field supplies does have its own column. So we're going to debit field supplies for $12,450 and credit accounts payable for $12,450. Next one in our textbook, issued check number 7 in payment of salaries. Issued check number 7 in payment of salaries. So we're going to go to our cash payments journal. It is the 31st, check number 7. Now, if we look down at our chart of accounts in our book, the only thing that talks about salary is salary expense. So that's going to be the account we're going to use. Salary expense is not an accounts payable account, so we're going to put it under other. So we're going to debit salary expense for $32,000 and credit cash for $32,000. Our last journal entry in our book, rented a building for 1 year in exchange for field equipment having a cost of $15,000. Rented a building for 1 year in exchange for field equipment having a cost of $15,000. This one, we are not paying cash and we are not purchasing anything. Since it does not fall under one of those categories, we're going to put it in our general journal. Okay, so we're going to go to our general journal and fill in our date, October 31st, 2014. We're going to debit prepaid rent for $15,000. And we're going to credit field equipment for $15,000. We are renting a building, and instead of giving them cash, we're giving them field equipment. The next step in our book tells us to post the journals to the accounts payable subsidiary ledger. So go ahead and grab your accounts payable subsidiary ledger. And we're going to start with our purchases journal. On the 30th, we had an accounts payable credit to Petro Services Inc. for $30,800. So we'll go to Petro Services Inc. on the 30th. P1 for purchases 1. And we had a credit for $30,800. Since this is our accounts payable ledger, we have an automatic credit balance. So we're just going to pull that $30,800 over into our balance column. Back in our journal, we're going to check mark our post reference to show that we've completed that one. The next one is also on the 30th. Midland Supply had an accounts payable credit of $12,450. So we find Midland Supply on the 30th. P1 had a credit of $12,450. We had a zero balance, so we're just going to bring that $12,450 over. Back in our journal, we're going to check mark it to show that we've done it. Go ahead and set your purchases journal to the side. We're going to look at our cash payments journal. Land is not accounts payable, but A1 Office Supply Company is. Okay. A1 Office Supply Company had an accounts payable debit of $1,320. So we come down here, it is the 30th. CP1 for cash payments 1. And we had a debit of $1,320. So we subtract these two numbers and we get 3,670. Back in your journal, we're going to put a check mark there to show that we've done that one. Salary expense is not accounts payable, so we don't have to do that one. So we've completed our journal entries. We're going to come back to our textbook, and step 2 tells us to post the individual entries, other account columns of the purchases journal and the cash payments journal, both columns of the general journal, to the appropriate general ledger accounts. Okay. So we're going to start with our purchases journal. So go ahead and grab your purchases journal again. You can set your accounts payable subsidiary ledger to the side and grab your general ledger. If we look at our purchases journal, all of these are checked, so we're done with those. We're going to scoot over here to our other accounts debit section, and we're going to go ahead and post these. The first one is to field equipment, which is on the first page of our general ledger. Field equipment had a debit of $32,600. So we're going to come down here to field equipment. It was October 16th. P1 for purchases 1. And it was a debit of $32,600. So we're going to bring that $32,600 over to the debit column under the balance. We're going to take our account number 17 back up to our journal and put it in our post-reference column. The next one is office equipment, and office equipment had a debit of $5,500, and that was on the 30th. Office equipment is on page 2 of your ledger accounts. So we have October 30th, P1 for purchases 1. It had a debit of $5,500. So it has a debit balance of $5,500. Take the account number 18 back to your journal. So now all of the individual amounts in our purchases journal have been posted. So go ahead and set your purchases journal to the side, and we'll look at our cash payments journal. At the top, we're going to start with rent expense on the 16th. Had a debit for $7,000. Rent expense is at the bottom here. October 16th. CP1 for cash payments had a debit of $7,000. So we now have a debit balance of $7,000. Account number 71 is going to go back to our journal in the post-reference column. Field supplies had a debit of $4,570. Field supplies is on page 1 of your ledger. Whoops. October 18th. CP1, a debit of $4,570. Gives us a debit balance of $4,570. Account number 14 goes back to your journal. Office supplies has a debit of $650. So our date was the 18th. CP1, a debit of $650. Gives us a balance of $650. Account number 15, going back to our journal. Oops. Land has a debit of $240,000. And land is on the second page of our ledger. It is the 28th. CP1. A debit of $240,000 gives us a balance of $240,000. The number 19, going back to your journal. And the last one on our cash payments journal, salary expense had a debit of $32,000. So our date, October 2014, the 31st, CP1. A debit of $32,000 gives us a balance of $32,000. Oops, sorry. Our account number 61, back to our journal. And we can see by looking at our cash payments journal, right down the middle, that they have all been posted. Excuse me. Now we're going to look at the bottom at our general journal. We have two things to post here. The first one is prepaid rent has a debit of $15,000. Prepaid rent is back on page 1 of our ledger. The date was the 31st. We're just going to put a number 1 because it's the general journal. It had a debit of $15,000, which gives it a debit balance of $15,000. Account number 16 is going to go back to our journal. And the last one here, field equipment, has a credit of $15,000. So we come down to field equipment. It is the 31st, just a 1. Has a credit of $15,000. We have a debit balance of $32,600, so we have to subtract those two numbers, and we get $17,600. And we take our account number 17 back to our journal. Whoops. And you can see that our general journal has been posted. Okay, the next step in our textbook tells us to total each column of the purchases journal and the cash payments journal and post the appropriate totals to the general ledger. Because the problem does not include transactions related to cash receipts, the cash account in the ledger will have a credit balance. And we know that a credit balance means, a credit balance in an asset like cash means a negative balance. But that is just because we haven't done any cash receipts for this problem. So we're going to start with our purchases journal again. You can set your general ledger to the side for right now. In our purchases journal, we're going to put in the date, which is the 30th, and the word totals. And we're going to put a single line across here. And we're going to put a single line across here. And we're going to add up each of these columns. Okay? Okay, once you have them totaled, go ahead and write the totals under each column. Accounts payable credit, $90,620. Field supplies debit, $47,530. Office supplies debit, $4,990. And then other, $38,100. Now, we have to make sure that our debits and our credits are equal. Okay, we have 3 debits and only 1 credit. So we're going to go ahead and add up those debits. I'm going to use my little side section here. Whoops. $47,530, $4,990, and $38,100. I'm going to go ahead and add up these three numbers. Whoop. And I get 90,620. This number should equal this number, which they do. So we know that our debits and our credits are equal. So we can go ahead and double underline these to prove that we've checked them and they're equal. Okay, set your purchases journal aside. We're going to go on to our cash payments journal. The date is the 31st. Totals. Put a single line under these three columns and then go ahead and add them up. Once you have your totals, you can go ahead and write them in: 284,220, 43,700, and 327,920. Now, these two are our debits, so we're going to take those two numbers and add them together to make sure our debits equal our credits. And I use the bottom of my paper to do that because there's more space. So you're going to take your 284,220 plus your 43,700, and you get a total of 327,920. That 327,920 should equal our cash credit, which it does. Since they're all equal, we can go ahead and double underline this to show that yes, they're equal, and yes, we've checked it. Your general journal, you really don't need to total. There's only two numbers there, and that's pretty basic that you can tell that they're equal. Now we need to post these totals into our general ledger accounts. Go ahead and grab your purchases journal. We're going to start there like always. And you also need your general ledger. Excuse me. We're going to start with the first column here is accounts payable credit. We're going to skip over all of these individual numbers and only post the total. So we're going to do an accounts payable credit for 90,620. So accounts payable is on our second page here. It is October 31st, 2014. We are on purchases page 1. And we had a credit of $90,620. We did not have a previous balance, so that $90,620 becomes our credit balance. We're going to take our account number 21, and in our journal, underneath our total, we're going to put the number 21 in parentheses to show that we posted that total. The next one is field supplies debit for $47,530. Field supplies is on page 1 of our general ledger. It is the 31st. Purchases 1. We had a debit of $47,530. We already had a debit balance, so we're going to go ahead and add those two numbers together. And we get 52,100. Take the 14 back to your journal and put it in parentheses underneath the total to show that you've done it. The next one is office supplies debit for $4,990. So finding office supplies, it is the 31st. Purchases 1. It was a debit of $4,990. We already had a debit balance, so we're going to add those two numbers together. And we get $5,640. So we're going to take the number 15 back to our journal and put it in parentheses. In the other accounts debit side, we've posted these individually to field equipment and office equipment. So we're going to put a check mark here to show that we do not post that number. Go ahead and set your purchases journal to the side and move on to your cash payments journal. In our cash payments journal, the first column is other accounts debit. Since it's other and we've posted all of the others individually, we're going to put a check mark underneath that one. Anything that says other that's not an actual account title, we're not going to post that one anywhere. The next column, accounts payable debit, $43,700. So we're going to go to accounts payable, which is on the second page. 31st, CP1 for cash payments 1. It was a debit of $43,700. Since we have a credit balance and a debit, we're going to subtract them, and we get $46,920. We're going to take the number 21 and put it back into our journal in parentheses under the amount that we just posted. Okay, the next one is a cash credit for $327,920. So we're going to go to our cash account. It is October 31st, 2014. Cash payments 1. It was a credit for $327,920, and that gives us a credit balance of $327,920. Now we said before, cash doesn't usually hold a credit because that means it's a negative number, but we also don't know what the balance was before we started. So we're going to leave it as a credit. Take that account number 11 back to your journal. Okay, our cash payments journal is finished. We look at our general journal, that one is finished, so we have posted everything. The next thing that our book tells us to do on step 4, sum the balances of the accounts payable creditor balances. We want to make sure, looking at our general ledger tells us that accounts payable has a balance of $46,520. We want to make sure that our accounts payable ledger has the same balance. So we're going to go to our accounts payable ledger. Now I'm going to use the bottom of it to do this, and we're going to add them up. $3,670 is the balance in this one. $12,450 is the balance for Midland Supply. And $30,800 is the balance for Petro Services. So I've written these three numbers down, and I'm going to add them up. Once we add them all up, we get $46,920, which should equal the balance in our accounts payable account, and it does. So we know we've done the problem correctly. Okay, that is the end of the problems for Chapter 5. Go ahead and jump back into your PowerPoint.